Hey guys, what's up? It's Stacking Chairs, the youth ministry podcast all about serving in youth ministry. Whether it be youth group or youth camp, whatever God has you serving in, that's what we're talking about. I'm one of your hosts, Josh Paul-Hemus. I'm joined by my fellow host and good friend,
Kyle Gray. Josh, this is episode 25.
25.
I feel like it's like a monumentous moment.
Yeah.
And so we have brought today an incredible guest to celebrate with us.
Yeah.
This man has done a podcast himself. This man has written books
Which is why I'm so nervous. My hands are sweating.
This man, well, better than your ears, because that would make it really, really awkward for your headphones.
Uncomfortable.
Hey, speaking of, would love to hear from you guys as we are moving ahead. What can we do? What can we talk about? What are things that you want us to discuss? Who are people that you want on this? But this is one of, I have been looking forward to this episode. Once again, we're in camp, so you're going to hear stuff in the background. Mm-hmm. Hopefully I won't get another call and I won't have to get up and walk out of the room.
That's in a coming episode.
That is in a coming.
We shot these out of order.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Why don't you introduce our guest?
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Scott Douglas Foreman. Scott David Foreman.
Douglas.
Douglas. I got it right the first time.
You got it.
Scott Douglas Foreman. Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What do you do? Tell us what your social security number is.
Do you really want me to?
No, I don't want you.
Okay. Because I've got LifeLock, so it won't matter.
Oh, there we go. Remember those old commercials where they put their identity on the side of the truck?
Didn't that guy get his identity stolen?
I'm like the CEO. Credit cards out in his name and everything.
Oh, man.
So I'm a pastor in South Jersey, nowhere near Vineland. North of that,
What's the town?
The church, Fellowship Bible Church, aboutfbc.org, is near Mullica Hill, New Jersey. So we're about 20 minutes.
Isn't that what you get when you aren't a good golfer? You get a Mullica Hill?
I think it's mullet. Yeah, that's it. A
mullet?
A mulligan.
You got a mullet?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that's a fish. Hey, so Scott used to work for Word of Life in a number of different avenues. Scott, you worked with tours for a while. You worked with gospel productions. You worked with the radio program. You did pretty much, from what I understand, everything. You were one of the camp directors on Word of Life Island. Let me ask you this. Is there an area of Word of Life that you had never been able to work that you would have wanted to work?
Like other than Florida?
Oh, wow. That's a good answer. Good answer.
Hey, Rich Andrews, if you are watching or listening to this episode, Scott just said he wants to work here. Scott was also the director of our Canadian ministries. Were you in charge of all of Canada?
Coast to coast to coast.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
The whole country.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Even Quebec.
Even Quebec.
Wow.
So do you speak French?
Yeah.
Okay.
I went to language school, but I really couldn't remember any of it right now, probably.
Yeah,
Scott invited me up to speak at Recharge. That was their winter camp. And he fed me poutine. Oh, well, when I say he fed me, it's not like I sat there with my mouth open and he like fed it to me like,
No, but poutine is like, you can get it at McDonald's even.
No.
It's everywhere.
In Quebec you can.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought you meant
McDonald's.
like, yeah. Poutine outside of Canada is...
I've never had it outside.
In South Jersey, they kind of call that disco fries.
Oh.
Yeah. But they make it with mozzarella, and you can't make it with mozzarella. You got to make it with cheese curd.
Yeah.
Goat cheese curd, right?
I had not heard that, but
I think
maybe
it's cow. I think it's cow.
I mean, I don't think I've ever had goat cheese curd. Is it good?
The only place I've ever had poutine was up in Ontario. So, and Owen Sound. Yeah. Hey, so Scott has recently written a book. Scott, how many books have you written?
6 or 7.
That's awesome. And
now, yeah.
Okay.
5 of those I combined into one book.
Oh, and what is that book called?
7 Crazy Years.
7 Crazy Years. Can I be honest with you?
Yeah.
It would have been better if you had 7 crazy books and then you could have said 7 crazy years because each book a year, but that's all right.
Next time you write 7 books in a row.
And so tell us a little bit about 7 Crazy Years. That's what we want to talk about today. Ministry from a parent to a teen, but also ministry and understanding these teenage years and the crazy years that they are. Tell us about the book.
Yeah. Well, so as you're aware, I have 4 boys, and I don't know, probably a lot of this was birthed out of just ministry I was doing with Word of Life and youth ministry and working with a few guys, Tyler, Kevin, Graham. And we would put together material that we would share at retreats and things like that, or on the road. And a lot of that material and things like media and things like that, as my boys started to get older, I knew that I wanted to be the one that shared with them principles they needed to learn about how to kind of live out these things in their own life.
Yeah.
Which led me to say, I'd like to write a little booklet on media. And so I did.
Yeah.
And then I wrote a booklet on dating, and then friendship, and why we believe what we believe, and things like that. And I don't know, last year I thought, it might help some people if I just kind of compiled all this instead of like making people like, you got to buy this, you got to buy this, you got to buy this. What if I just kind of compile it? It might be easier for people, and maybe a better discipleship resource if someone wanted to like take someone through it. So that's why I put together this book, 7 Crazy Years.
That's awesome. You talk about in the book, and you talked about today at camp. Scott was our camp speaker this week here at the Coast. Again, if you have not signed up for camp for next year, whether you're up in one of our New York camps or down here in Florida, you need to check it out. That registration is totally open. But Scott, this week you talked about several theological points, and you kind of hit on it here, but the importance of a young person understanding not just what they believe, but why they believe it. How has that impacted your boys as you've seen them grow to understand some of these weightier topics and ideas?
Great question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Particularly as kids are coming out of the elementary years into their tween years and then into their teen years, there's a lot of things that are floating around their brains. And oftentimes they don't vocalize it. It's just floating around up there. And particularly the kids that were brought up in Christianity, they're thinking about a lot of stuff, and maybe out of fear, maybe out of immaturity in how to, verbalize it correctly. They have a lot of questions. Yeah. And I just when we would have like family devotions and stuff, I just wanted to talk to the boys about, it was really apologetics. I mean, without them knowing it, it was apologetics. It was like, well, guys, why do you think God has the ability to talk to us in his word? Why is that? And how do we know that God isn't talking to us in other sources of literature? How do we know that? How do we know that Jesus is really who he says he is? And these are the questions that we would have as a family around the table for years. Really, when we would open up our quiet times as a family and we would talk through that passage for the day, these things would just naturally come up, which happens as you go through the Bible, 90% of the Bible in 6 years. That stuff just surfaces. And it just led to some really good questions. And I just really took it upon myself, and I hope I've stewarded it well, that before the boys leave the house, in the basics of the Christian faith, I, as their dad, have done my duty. That I've not left that up to the youth pastor.
Yeah.
That's not his job. Primarily, it's my job.
Yeah.
And that's not to slam youth pastors out there or, families that really rely on the youth pastor for that stuff. But, I think oftentimes as dads, we should be stepping it up and being able to articulate why we believe what we believe and then pass that on to our kids. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Gotcha. So what does that look like to work with a youth pastor in that regard as a father, working with this person who's leading them spiritually in the church? What's that relationship look like for you when you're going over these kind of topics?
Thankfully, the youth pastor at our church holds to that same philosophy. That it's, with Ephesians 6:1-2, it's the father's responsibility. And, you definitely throw mothers into that mix too.
Absolutely.
Parental responsibility to train up your children in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And the youth pastor cannot take that place. It has to be mom and dad. Yeah. And the youth pastor, we could talk about this for a long time.
Yeah, we could.
The phenomenon of the youth pastor is a relatively new phenomenon in ministry.
Sure. Right.
in the last 50, 60 years. And I'm sure you guys have talked through some of that stuff before, since World War II and what happened with all that with churches and, the genesis of the youth pastor, which is not a bad thing. Yeah. There's lots of great things that have happened in, church history that have birthed these roles. But when mom started working and maybe dad started working more, they needed someone that could actually teach the kids. And at the peril of that relationship between the mom and the dad with their kids. And I think the youth pastor just has to be really cognizant of that, but also embracing the fact that a lot of these kids that come from unsafe homes or don't have parents that think that way, they're going to have to supplement some of that. As the shepherd of that flock. But whenever they can, encouraging parents, hey, we want you to be the primary influencers at home. You've got them far longer than my 90 minutes a week. And here's the ways that maybe I, as a youth pastor, can help equip you and train you to be a better shepherd of your kids.
That makes me think, in some ways, it probably opened up some doors for you to have real, honest, open accountability with your boys. But I'm sure that you also encourage them to seek accountability outside of the home. How did you balance that? Being their dad, talking about these different things. Well, let me ask you, let's go back. Did it open up some accountability doors for you with your boys?
Absolutely. And it's just one of those things. Like when I would go through in the dating chapter, when we get into some purity stuff and how to think about purity and how to think about the opposite sex and that sort of thing. The questions that I write right into the book, unless you're going to skip it, you have to ask them. And the way that I do it with my boys is I want you to read the chapter and then we'll get together and we'll talk through it. And I want you to write in your answers and then we'll talk through it. If you're going to skip over it, then you'd skip over it. But if you're not going to skip over it, they're going to talk about it.
That's cool.
And so like in this area, and this area, and this area, how do you struggle? Not do you. How do you struggle?
Right.
It's almost like assuming, hey, teens are going to struggle with it. We as adults struggle with it. So how are you doing with this?
Right.
That has definitely birthed some hard, but even as a dad, hearing hard things, but necessary things that you want to hear before they're 25.
Right.
Things you're struggling with and that sort of thing. You want to hear about those things, but hard to hear because they're your child and wanting them to get a handle on things. Which I'm glad you brought up the concept, Kyle, of different accountability voices. Our youth pastor at our church just did this, read this study on the most successful teens having multiple voices in their life. And how the most successful teens that come out of high school and go into college, the ones that do really well socially, academically, et cetera, have like 4 to 5 voices in their life that are speaking truth into their life.
Wow. Gotcha.
When you think about that from a parental standpoint, from a church standpoint, from a school standpoint, those voices of truth in their life are so important. And we shouldn't necessarily be territorial as youth pastors, as parents with those things, because God uses multiple voices in our kids' lives. Like Kyle, you think about you and I in our journey. God used our parents significantly in our lives, but also many other voices that God used to help guide us and direct us. It's pretty important.
I have 2 questions very, very quickly. First, how early do you advocate somebody starting that accountability side relationship? I think we're seeing stats that pornography usage, pornography involvement, the way that our world is going, it is getting younger and younger and younger. So when do you recommend, and it's just your opinion, but when do you recommend beginning that topic of conversation?
I saw the smirk and I was like, well, he just like, this is a whole new podcast.
It really is. Boy, is it ever. I might shock you with my answer.
Go.
Kindergarten.
Really?
Wow.
I like that.
Now, You're not having pornography conversations at kindergarten.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
I just had this conversation last week with parents that were thinking about their kids and how it's just starting so early, and how every year the creep of the culture goes earlier and earlier and earlier. It's like, real quick, when I was in high school, the new youth ministry phenomenon was junior high. It was like, man, you were like a cutting edge church if you like had this like awesome ministry to 7th and 8th graders.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Now that's like, well, duh, of course you're gonna have a ministry to 7th and 8th graders. Now it's, but we got 5th and 6th graders.
Yeah.
Like we're so
Club
hip.
56 coming to you every week.
And in probably in 10 years, it's gonna be 3rd and 4th graders.
Right.
We got an awesome 3rd and 4th grade ministry.
Right.
Yeah.
That's just the cultural creep.
Right.
And so I'm not advocating for talking about pornography with children that are in kindergarten. What I am saying is those conversations relating to the Garden of Eden and how God designed things to work without being explicit,
Right.
without being sensual or sexual,
Right.
just laying a foundation starts with kindergarten kids.
Yeah.
And explaining, why did God say that this and this and this and this was good?
Right.
Yeah.
And what does our culture say about that? Like that starts early.
Well, that cultural foundation is starting already. I mean, even the shows that my daughter watches at 15 months old, we have to be very cautious on the things that we allow on the television, because the things that are going to be communicated to her values are going to be communicated through a lot of the media she's going to intake.
Oh, there were absolutely some like little kids programs that I was like, you're not watching that. You're not watching that. Not because they talked about wrong things. I'm just like, I don't like the way that parent interaction happened. Okay. So you just blew the glass ceiling out of the park, I think, with what people, I think, expected you to say. I'm sure there's other people that are like, I think you should start before kindergarten. Okay. Probably most of our audience are youth workers, youth pastors, but we have a lot of parents and a lot of people that have said, hey, I listen to your podcast. I check it out. So Scott, you just said kindergarten, and let's say I've got a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and I've never, how do I not feel hopeless, and what can I do right now?
The conversations, relating to gender, sexuality, that sort of thing, those conversations are going to have to start younger now, because the culture is being so open and honest about it and forthright about it, and how our culture in public school is forcing these things down our kids' throats in 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. And so those conversations are going to have to happen sooner.
Yeah.
I think if parents can get out of the reactive mentality and get on the proactive mentality, that's going to eliminate a lot of helplessness, feelings of helplessness. So in other words, if you're being reactive in your parenting in general, you're always going to be behind the 8 ball. I mean, that's what reactions are.
Yeah.
Being proactive, because these things are coming.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need a crystal ball to know these things are coming. Yeah. Okay, so therefore, what's my strategy?
Yeah.
And so the helplessness, the hopelessness of, man, I just feel like I can't do anything about this.
Yeah.
As far as cultural creep, you're right. There's nothing you can do about that. But your proactiveness as a parent in knowing, by the time my kid hits 1st grade, here's the things I want to cover. 2nd grade, here's the things I want to cover. 3rd grade, here's the things I want to cover. To the point where when they're in 3rd and 4th grade, the conversations of, okay, what does it mean to be a one-woman man? What does it mean to be a one-man woman?
Yeah.
You can have those types of conversations, not even mention pornography.
Right.
Where they just start to understand God's design is for one person for life.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? How does it look like? Hey, boys, what would it mean? How would you feel if I started to look at another woman other than your mom? How would that make you feel?
Did you ask your boys that question?
Yeah, we've talked about stuff like that.
Did they give you did they just stare at you?
Yeah, like the thought of that is like kind of like weird and freaky.
Yeah.
But it helps them understand that, before God, we don't have the right to do whatever we want. He's given us boundaries that we have to follow in.
I love that.
What about sheltering? Like, I know that a lot of parents' responses aren't, hey, I know I'm going to have to talk about this. I'm not trying to avoid it, but I'm also trying to just keep them away from it. And one way is by sending them to maybe a private school, like a Christian school. Maybe another way is being really intentional about not letting them have friends.
Or not going to school at all, just doing homeschool.
Homeschooling, yeah. But like even sheltering like the kind of friends they have, not bad friends, but more of like the friends who their parents live in different ways than a Christian would.
Yep.
Like, where is that balance between sheltering and just, hey, free reign? Is there a balance in there that you know of?
Yes, there is.
Okay, great. Next question. Good. There we go.
And full disclaimer, I'm not the expert on these things. I can only speak from our personal experience.
Sure.
Rachel and I talked through those things.
Yeah.
And we wanted to ensure that when our boys were young, that a foundation was laid. And how are we going to lay this foundation in a good, wise way? And for us, that was to homeschool. Okay, now that was for us.
Yeah.
And we happened to be in a place in life where we could do that, where we could homeschool.
Yeah.
But the end goal was to get them to public school.
Whoa, He just lost half the audience and then lost the other half of the audience.
Okay, so our philosophy was homeschool, Christian school, public school.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so we wanted the boys, even just scholastically, to be homeschooled because of how enriching it can be when it's done right and well.
Yeah.
Just even scholastically in their reading, their writing, and that sort of thing. And then we moved into the Christian school to get a little bit more socializing, get a little bit more of a biblical foundation so that, you want your kids to have somewhat of a worldly comprehension prior to leaving the roost. My opinion. In other words,
I agree.
When they hit that university campus, you want them to be somewhat aware of how do you defend your faith? How do you share Christ with an unbeliever?
Yeah.
How do you be surrounded by cultural junk day in and day out, and how do you handle that? So that's just our opinion, that getting them into high school and rubbing shoulders with people that do not think anything like you think, and how do you respond to that? And how do you minister in the midst of that? I'm not opposed to parents that send their kids to Christian high schools and that sort of thing. But just 2 weeks ago, as my son and Lucas and I were talking about Christian school versus public school, I said to Lucas, who's going into 11th grade, Lucas, do you think you'd ever want to go into a Christian high school? He said, well, it would definitely have some benefits, but who would tell all those people in the high school about Christ? That's important.
Yeah.
That's cool that your son grabs that.
And I just think that that's just an important mentality for parents, that if you, the sheltering will end. It's just a matter of when. And what did you equip them with when that sheltering ended?
Yeah.
And so I just think helping your kids know how to talk to other kids about Christ and how to share Christ on a sports team, how to live for Christ on a sports team.
Yeah.
To me, to Rachel and I, that stuff was just very important.
I love the perspective, because again, you're absolutely right. And Josh, we've talked about this before, just with the idea of allowing your youth group not to be this self-encasing. And again, this is my opinion. This is the opinion that you and I have talked about. It's not biblical. Thou shalt not partner with other ministries, or thou shalt only partner with other. It doesn't say that. But we talked about the idea of when you as the youth pastor are the primary or the main, hey, I'm the one that speaks at all of our youth camps. I'm the one that speaks at our youth nights.
Oh, yeah.
Then when these kids graduate, they haven't been taught how to create their own biblical community.
Yeah.
Well, you're taking it really to a whole nother level and going, really, no, it shouldn't start with that youth pastor. It ought to start with us. And we are the ones prepping them in. And we're the ones that are probably in different ways, slowly here, slowly there, other ways. Okay, hey, we feel like you're ready to bring in outside shows and influences and different things. And one thing I've always appreciated about Scott, and Scott, that I appreciate about you, is you haven't shied away from culture. In fact, in some ways, you've been a student of culture to help your boys to navigate through these different things. You talked specifically, and you mentioned it here and there, you talked about dating. And you said something very interesting from the stage this week that got probably the biggest reaction out of anything that you said. You said that dating, there are some 14-year-olds that should be dating. You said there are some 25-year-olds that should not be dating. Is there a typical age that you say, hey, well, obviously that you don't say there's a typical age. So where did you land at that viewpoint, and how did you land on that viewpoint?
It's really easy for us as parents to become legalists and pigeonhole our kids into these categories. And Rachel and I just didn't want to do that. We wanted to recognize the fact that this son is different from this son, and this son's maturity is different from this son's maturity. And he's demonstrating things in his life that would point to the fact that he seems to be ready, and this son does not. The biggest things being your responsiveness to the Lord, your responsiveness to parental authority, your ability to demonstrate in areas of your life self-control. Some of those things are just really important, and parents need to be observing these things and making wise decisions, and putting some parameters on some things like some friendships and that sort of thing that can provide some guidance and also train in the process. Because it shouldn't be like a driver's license. When you get to certain ages that you suddenly get a pass because hold on a minute. That 16-year-old kid, there's no way they should be going out with girls for these reasons. And they just need more time to be trained in some things versus other kids that are like pick up stuff fast. Right. And maybe even in their maturity, they would indicate that they're ready, which doesn't mean that, they're going out all by themselves and that sort of thing. It just means, I'd like to have Susie over so we can, play a game together as a family. Okay. Well, let's investigate that a bit. That sort of mentality.
Yeah. Which son is dating Susie?
Currently, well, you could maybe say Dawson's dating Susie.
So you got four boys.
Dawson got called out.
You got four boys. That you're saying,
but yeah, her name's Gracie, not Susie.
Gracie. Hi, Gracie.
Now Gracie got called out.
Gracie, if you ever want to be on the podcast, you're more than welcome to come on and talk about your perspective of the Foreman family.
That's so funny.
So how does that work between your boys? Because let's be honest, and Josh, I don't think you've experienced this yet, just because number one, you have one child, and number two, the age hurts. But Scott, I have four, you have four. You constantly hear but they got to, but they got to this, and how have you helped them to have a mature outlook and understand that, in the same way that you don't want me to treat you like the other three, you want me to treat you and to know you. So how do you not have that comparison? And was it different for all four of your boys, or do you feel like the way that you guys raised him, you allowed them all to start at that same age, or like practically get real for us?
The boys have definitely done some comparisons, mostly with each other, not so much other kids, like outside the family, but mostly with each other. They've done some comparisons. And Rachel and I have tried to be gracious in those moments and explain differences and different factors that contribute to the decision making. And the reason why I haven't seen that a ton with the boys, I think, is because from day one, Rachel and mine's parenting philosophy was life is not about you. And I don't know how many times we would say that, are you being selfless or selfish right now? I mean, how many times did I say that? Are you being selfish or selfless right now? In this perspective, in this question, in this attitude, are you putting others first right now, or are you putting yourself first right now? So oftentimes, even when we would get questions like that, we would have to ask those types of things. Hey, even in that question you're asking, are you putting us first or yourself? Like we would say those things all the time. And I think those things are just like great reminders, especially for teenagers and kids, that because they are fed the lie that life is all about them.
Sure.
You know, grab life by the coattails and ride it. Yeah. It's such a worldly, satanic philosophy because a Christ-centered life is all about others.
Yeah.
It's all about others and loving others and putting other people first. And so I think that's why some of those comparisons, and you have to, as a parent, you have to start that so early, so young, like at 15 months, you're laying the foundation of life is not about you, it's about others. Yeah. You're starting that foundation so young. And when you apply that consistently, by the time they're 15, 16, it's just reminders.
It's crazy just to see my daughter already, like she's picking up words like dada, mama. She's raised in a bilingual home. So she's saying things like, oye, hola, ¿cómo estás? Oh, she's not saying ¿cómo estás? But she is saying, sorry, that was
Encarnación.
Yeah, she's saying big words. But the one word that she just picked up is no. And I'm already having this existential crisis, like, oh no, am I saying no too much? Or am I not saying no enough? And it's just so funny as we're talking about parenting, I'm like listening and I'm like, oh no, I have to deal with all of this. And I keep reminding myself that I'm a parent, and it's just such a surreal experience. Which takes me into my next question, which is you talk about adjusting per child. You talk about like having like, you know, just a little bit different for each kid and making sure you're tailoring your parenting to them. Same thing can be true in youth ministry, sure. But what do you do with the changing culture? I know you talked really, you know, about like, hey, the culture is changing, being intentional that you're speaking to those things. Do you think there's room for us to change with the culture? And I know like part of your answer already, so that's why I'm asking very pointedly, but do we change with the culture when we're hitting these approaches toward parenting?
What aspect of culture would you be referring to? Like, can you give me an example on that?
That's a good question. I guess I did paint a pretty broad stroke.
You did.
So I guess we'll hone in on, well, we talked about like purity and stuff, so I want to try and like hit on a different topic. So what do you do with a changing culture in even just parenting approach? All right, so the word no. All the books, everything says now, like all the Instagram reels, who am I kidding? I'm not reading books. I'm watching TikToks. The TikToks all say, don't say no. Like, what do you do when the culture says, hey, don't say no anymore at all?
Yeah.
You always redirect. Do you change with the culture and try and fit into it? Or do you always just go back to biblical truth? I guess I'm asking, like, still is a broad question, but let's just hone in on this part then, if you can.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And that subject in and of itself is another podcast because
Guilty. We do it.
I think for a lot of parents and Rachel and I included, to be able to articulate why you parent the way that you do in the culture that you do. Okay, so like how the culture operates in Southern Ontario is different from how the culture operates in South Jersey in its application, in its practical application. And so the rat race is the same, but the application of the rat race changes. And that would be the same here in Central Florida. It's a rat race, but it looks a little different. You know, every rat race just looks a little different. So that culture for us changed. We went from Canada to South Jersey. There were adjustments that had to be made. Yeah. But for Rachel and I, the parenting philosophy didn't change as far as God first, family second. Yeah. Emphasize church over sports. Don't make it impossible to do sports, but just encourage other things first. Yeah. Be mindful of your relationships. Those cultural things, you're absolutely right, do change all the time. But as parents, you've got to be really confident and understanding and in lockstep with each other as mom and dad as to what our parenting philosophy is. And in the scenario that we find ourselves, how are we applying this philosophy? Yeah. That philosophy doesn't change with 2-year-olds versus 12-year-olds. It really doesn't. The philosophy doesn't change. The application of the philosophy might change, but the philosophy doesn't change. And so, how we're encouraging our kids in their friendships, how we're encouraging our kids in their service, it's going to look very different through the ages, but the philosophy really shouldn't change. A good question for parents is, well, what is our philosophy?
Yeah.
Can we articulate why we believe what we believe about X, Y, and Z and the application of it?
Yeah.
And that's a great exercise for parents to go through.
Yeah.
And needed.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to be, just like on a date, you don't want to be making decisions on the fly.
Yeah.
Bad time to be making decisions.
Yeah.
When you're looking at each other and, and things
Endless Love is playing on the background.
Absolutely. Or Barry White or whoever,
My endless love.
That is not the time to be making decisions. Okay. So, when your child is 12, 14, 15 months, that is not the time to be on the fly making parental philosophy decisions. You got to talk about this stuff in advance.
Yeah.
And continue to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's like when we were in the trenches of parenting, when we had 4 boys that were very close in age, and just how chaotic that was. Rachel and I had to continually reaffirm, this is why we are doing what we're doing. There were times where both Rachel and I were in tears with like, can we do this? Like, this is hard.
Why did we think that the 4th one was a good idea?
This is hard. And Rachel just reminding herself and us talking about it together.
Yeah.
We apply this in our parenting because the scripture tells us to do this.
Wow.
And if we don't do this, this will be the result. And we're not going there.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that just reminds you on those tough days,
Yeah.
this is why we're doing what we're doing.
Now, you guys sit at a stage, a really, really cool stage, where you have Ryan is how old?
15.
He's 15. So he's got a couple more years before the end of his high school time. But then you have David, who's actually now
Almost
an
21.
intern in the church that you're working with.
Right.
How cool is that to see your son stepping out? Does that relationship shift? Do those expectations shift? Do some of those questions shift? How does that look now that you're like, man, like, because obviously the one thing I know that you're not going to say is, hey, my son's achieved it. He's golden. He's good. We can back off from him and dust off our hands because he's got it. He's good. Let's focus on the next 3. So how has that changed with your oldest?
Yeah. So, in shepherding a child's heart, and I hit on this in another book that I wrote called Parenting Those Teachable Twos and Beyond. There is a window of authority and influence. And when your children are born, it's all authority and no influence. Like, you're not being influential in your shepherding with a 2-year-old. It's all based on authority. No, you do this because I'm dad, I'm mom. You just do it.
Right.
You're not like coming alongside them, explaining to them kind of the philosophy of why you don't need to watch 12 hours of Dora the Explorer. You're not explaining that. You're just saying, no, you're watching 30 minutes of it and that's it.
Yeah.
However, that authority window, the minute they're born, starts to close, revealing influence. And by the time they hit 15, 16, 17, the authority window is almost completely closed. And the influence window is like wide open. We run into problems with parents as parents when we don't recognize the fact that with our 18-year-old, the authority window is in essence closed and the influence window is wide open. We run into parents when we still think the authority window is open and we treat them such.
Yeah.
You cannot treat your adult child like the authority window is wide open. It is all about influence, whether you made it that way or not. Okay, so a lot of parents that we interact with, they get those two things confused.
Yeah.
With their 2-year-old, they think it's all about influence. Good luck. It's all about authority. And with their 18-year-old, they think it's all about authority and not about influence.
Good luck.
When you get the when you get the windows confused when they're little, you're going to have window confusion when they're 18.
Right.
And so for us, we've got an 18-year-old, we've got a soon to be 21-year-old.
Yeah.
They're still under the house. They're still in our house. They're still somewhat under our authority. But man, it's like, it's all about influence now. And so, you know, we've got things in our house that we all have to do together, chores and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The conversations that I'm having, you know, with an 18-year-old relating to, hey, you know, we as a community in this home, we have to get stuff done.
Yeah.
And if we don't, here's the consequence. That's very different from a conversation with a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
So it just shifts to influence.
Yeah.
And parents really have to understand that shift and understand that authority window is only open for a season. And if you don't take full advantage of that, you're going to have problems later on. You're going to have big problems later on.
Yeah. And my parents, I shout out to my parents for, they held to that. And I remember my parents saying to me all the time when I was little, I'm not your friend. And like, it was authority. And my parents would always say like, there's going to be this like crossover or eventually like we can become friends. And now I remember being so upset with my dad. I remember going to the neighbor's house down the street because my dad turned off the Wi-Fi at 11 o'clock at night. And like we were there for dinner one night and I was like telling him like my dad's the worst. He turns off the Wi-Fi and they're like, oh man, like they're like, life is so tough kind of deal. And I was being so frustrated. And now I call my dad, we try and call at least once a week. I try and call my parents and just connect with them. And like, they're my friends now. And I don't have to call and ask for permission to go out and do stuff anymore.
And to leave your Wi-Fi on after 11
Yeah, and leave my
o'clock?
Wi-Fi on after 11 o'clock. How would I stay up and eat cheese and watch TV shows after 11 o'clock?
So is he your friend now?
But that's the thing. My dad is like my friend, but he's also like a person I can go to with problems as well. Like he's those things.
He would be
because
in
of
his
those things.
MySpace top 8.
Yeah, he would.
Yeah.
But like my dad, I call him all the time when I have a problem, but I call just to say, hey, what's up? And he's an IT guy at work. And I was making fun of him. He's like, I'm just eating lunch. I'm like, by yourself, probably, you old IT guy. And like, we have like that relationship where I can call and like make jokes with my parents.
Mr. Paul Hamus or Paulamus.
Paul Hamus,
Paul
that's right. You have it.
Obama. Welcome on the podcast anytime you want.
He eats lunch with his friends all the time. I just made fun of him that day. Don't worry.
Called him
he's
out.
a cool guy.
It's crazy.
But they set that foundation and they lived it as well as being the authority. Like they've been involved doing Olympian clubs for 27 years now because I'm 27. They've been doing it.
That's cool.
And I have that foundation because they laid that foundation. So anyway, just wanted to say thankful for you guys. And they do listen. So they'll call and cry later to me. So
Hey, Scott, we need to have you back on this because I think there's about 4 other routes that we could have easily gone down. Thank you so much for being here. But Josh, can we take him into our next segment?
Yeah. So do you know about the segment Small Group? So small group is our time where we talk about things that are encouraging or funny that just happen in our lives. Time just kind of reflect. And so I guess, Scott, do you have any stories that are okay to tell about your life as a parent?
Josh will cut it if it's not
I'll
okay.
cut it. I have cut stories before. Don't worry.
Well, I mean, with 21 years of parenting, there's lots of interesting stories that I could share.
Give us one about David, though, because we
Come
know
on.
David.
We do know David. Our audience doesn't know David. But
So
we know,
but they'll
know
still
David.
enjoy it.
Yeah.
David, we'd love to have you on the podcast. Come on.
David, when David was taking naps as a little kid,
Yeah.
that kid would sweat
What?
like crazy. And, before we cut his hair, he had this wicked mullet.
Yeah.
And I would just come home from work and David would be sleeping because he would take like these 3-hour naps every day.
Wow.
Wait, word.
And he'd sleep until 5 o'clock and I'd come in and wake him up and he was just covered in sweat. And his mullet was just flowing with this sweaty mullet. And just a great memory.
That's awesome.
The sweaty mullet. That'd probably be the title of his autobiography. The sweaty mullet.
Wow. That's so crazy. That's what they used to call me in high school.
The sweaty mullet.
Yeah.
What age did he have this mullet at?
Did he what?
What age was he when he had this mullet?
This is when he's like, 14, 15 months.
Because mullets are back now.
I thought you said 14, 15.
I wish he had a mullet at 14,
Hey,
15.
David, would you be willing to grow out the mullet for... every good youth pastor has a Mississippi waterfall, a mullet.
David's too cool now to have a mullet.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a shame.
Is it not cool to have a mullet in Muffin?
I have seen kids at the high
Muffin
school
House.
with mullets,
New Jersey?
but
No.
not in the Foreman house. I've not
Mullets
seen
are
mullets.
back. Mullets are back right
Yeah.
now. And
I wouldn't mind growing one
Yeah.
out.
And mullets go down your back.
Yeah.
They can.
Yeah.
They can.
Yeah.
Would you grow out a mullet with me together?
You know what, Scott? I think that would be a conversation for Nicola and Rachel to have.
Okay.
And if you can get my wife to agree, I'd be open to the conversation of the possibility.
You should call and check with your parents first. Make sure they're okay with it.
Yeah, probably get their permission and influence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll wrap up here. This has been Stacking Chairs with Scott Foreman.
Yes.
Talking about his book, talking about parenting as a whole. But we've had a great time. Scott, thank you so much for being on the show.
Have you ever ordered your sons to stack chairs?
Absolutely.
Who is the best chair stacker?
Maybe Lucas.
Who is the most organized chair stacker?
Probably Lucas.
Who would figure out how to get the other ones to do it while he watched?
Maybe David.
Wow.
Darn.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Well, just because
Stacking Chairs.
he's an organized leader. He's an organized leader, and he would figure out a way to get the boys to do it while he organized it.
He would yell,
Clever.
"Stack those chairs!"
Oh, that's his sign off. He yells, "Stack those chairs" at the end. Hey guys, also don't forget that we're going to be taking a month-long break when this episode airs. Just gives us a chance to kind of regroup after camp's over. We'll still be recording some episodes during that time, but we're going to take a month away from posting, and then we'll come back and you guys will hear us again a month from when this episode airs. Thanks so much for listening. We look forward to hearing from you guys. Make sure you email us stackingchairspod@wol.org, and we look forward to connecting with you again at the end of this month.